Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This will be the Audit Government Efficiency Committee meeting for December 11th. Councilman Den resigns. Apologize for my delay, but we were downstairs in the rotunda lighting the menorah for Hanukkah, and we've got two items on the agenda. Mr. Rosendahl is still downtown. Downstairs. Mr. Labange is downstairs. I don't know if they're going to make it or not, but we do have two items on the agenda. So, Mr. Clerk, let's go and move on and get it done.
Okay, item number 1, Controller reports relative to the Controller's analysis of Los Angeles Fire Department's response times.
Well, we have, why don't you Fire Department come on up too? Chief, you can come up. Don't be shy. All right.
Okay. Good afternoon. Cynthia Varela with the Controller's Office. On May 18th, 2012, the Controller's Office completed an analysis of the Fire Department's response times. The overall objective of the analysis was to independently compute and compare the Fire Department's actual response times for 4 distinct time periods to the standards set by the National Fire Protection Association. The time periods related to significant changes in the deployment of fire resources and occurred prior to July 2009 to the present. As you know, incident dispatch and response information is captured and recorded in the Fire Department's computer-aided dispatch system, also referred to as CAD. Our review analyzed all response time data for incidents from January 1st, 2007 through March 26, 2012. We examined the accuracy and reliability of the department's incident data and calculated actual response times for the deployment periods that occurred, as I mentioned, prior to July 2009 through March 2012. We determined actual response times as measured by the fire department for turnout, which is defined as the fire department unit receiving the alarm or radio notification and preparing to leave the incident, and travel, which is defined as the fire department unit travels to the incident and arrives on scene. We also calculated the full response time as understood by the public, and that's from the initial 911 contact that's made originally to the LAPD 911 Service Center. We use the same criteria and benchmarks as well as a consistent calculation methodology for all emergency medical service incidents and all fire non-EMS incidents. We also determined response times for the first advanced life support paramedic unit to an EMS incident, first response to structure fire incidents, and response times for ambulance transports. Our analysis found that LAFD's response time performance cannot be compared to NFPA standards because we could not rely on the department's determination of emergency and non-emergency incidents. NFPA standards are established for measuring response performance for emergency incidents. We found that LAFD assigns all incidents with a detailed incident type code, which in turn specifies if it is an emergency or non-emergency. However, we noted a significant number of the 1.9 million incidents that were subject to our analysis that use this non-definitive code. Therefore, our report analyzed response times, and we did not make a distinction between emergency and non-emergency. The overall results of our review noted that the department had used an inconsistent methodology between the standards that they were using in 2008 and 2010. They were using a 6-minute standard compared to a 5-minute standard, and in calculating the reported results. We also noted the limitations of an aging information system and the inherent risk of not capturing some travel times due to possible human error related to the necessary action of pushing a button on the dispatched unit to trigger a timestamp. Based on our review, we recommended that fire department management should adopt a consistent methodology for differentiating and coding emergency and non-emergency incidents in the CAD database, and for reporting actual response times measured against NFPA standards, and clearly communicate this method to all interested stakeholders. Number 2, we recommended consider periodically reporting the total response time for all emergency incidents, which includes the relative time segments of fire department's call processing, turnout, and travel, as it would be more meaningful to the public. And number 3, to determine feasible and cost-beneficial solutions to improve system technologies used to measure and report actual response times in order to improve data reliability, validation, and flexible reporting. Such solutions could include expanding the capability or replacing the computer-aided dispatch system, installing a global positioning system within all fire units for direct interface with CAD, and other software solutions. We recently evaluated the department's action plans and target implementation dates for the 3 recommendations and found them acceptable. Based on the department's recent correspondence, we consider recommendations 1 and 2 are targeted for completion by the end of 2012, and a target implementation for recommendation 3 will be based on responses to the recently issued RFP for our fire station alerting system.
Well, are there any other standards they have other than the NFPA? Are there any standards that they judge, or is that the only one that they use for a gauge?
The department also had their own internal goals, but because of the problems with the data and how to differentiate between that's where we ran into problems in comparing it. But we were trying to use the national standards.
And that is a standard was adopted by fire department.
Yes.
Is that the one used throughout the country, though? Are there any other standards that are applied
I understand that is commonly used by
throughout the country?
throughout the country, yes.
Okay, and we obviously had some issues with that. I know this has been a controversial thing for quite a while with the response, 85% emergency medical calls, and the delay from the time they get to the police department, 911, until the time it gets transferred over. People call landline, they can go direct in. I mean, a lot of people don't know that we can educate to hopefully speed the process. I know if you get a call at 3 o'clock in the morning, they're probably going to get there a lot quicker than 3 o'clock in the afternoon, because when you see the traffic volume that continues to grow. And I've seen situations where the ambulance heading to a call, code 3, red light and siren, is stopped in traffic. Traffic is so gridlocked, they can't go anywhere. They turn off the siren, they got the red lights flashing until traffic clears. Now, meanwhile, that's delay the response. I mean, they can't fly over the cars, so there's obviously an issue. As congestion continues to build in the city, this response time question keeps coming up, and we've got to compare apples to apples and say, how long does it take, the average when we're talking about, and the ridiculous part is to say something that's unrealistic when you've got nothing but traffic congestion. And traffic congestion, I don't know if it's included in that, but it's a reality that we can't continue to ignore when you talk about the distance from the station to the call, and if that unit's tied up, someone else has to respond, either advanced life support or basic life support. But I got some questions. I'll wait till my colleague Bill Rosendahl takes a seat, and then we'll ask some questions. Bill was down there at the menorah lighting also, so Bill, you need some oil for the wheels, I think.
Yeah, you're right.
We need to get some oil or WD-40.
It's a simple machine, and it works better than all those high-pollution ones. Like, a woman named Evelyn had it, and she passed, before she passed, she gave it to me.
I'm going to bring a can of WD-40. Now we have the fire department change the tires on it. We'll get it running good.
Sorry for that.
That's okay.
Oh, look, good to see you. I grab my wrist.
So we're joined by my colleague, Councilman Rosendahl. We're on item number 1, and we just heard from the Controller's Office on the audit dealing with the analysis of Los Angeles Fire Department's response times and some of the issues, some of the concerns, and how we deal with the situation. Some of the questions I have, walk us through how response data is measured and what is the general management of the data. So how response data is measured, and then what is the general management of the data? Do we have that squared away, or is that still somewhat confusing?
No, we have David Yamahata, Deputy Chief, Fire Department. As we presented in City Council on Tuesday, as a result of the audit, and let me back up a little bit, Fire Department did agree with all the recommendations that were put forth by the audit from the Controller's Office. With that said,
So you're not here arguing about what they're bringing forward?
not at all.
Okay.
And actually, as Cindy indicated, we are moving forward with implementing several of the recommendations. As you're well aware of, the fire chief, after the audit came out, formed a information and data analysis task force. That presentation was made in City Council on Tuesday. What the task of that task force, one of the objectives of the task force was to provide data accuracy and reliability. With that said, specifically to response times, one of the issues that was raised in the audit was bifurcating the emergency and the non-emergency calls. We have since moved forward in doing that. One of the challenges we had initially with our CAD system was kind of peeling back some of the reports that have been developed over the years and basically start from the base so that we could move forward and provide accurate information. The task force was able to do that, and from this point forward, in future reports, you will have accurate information.
So how response data is measured in the general management of the data, that's been changed, that's one changed
Yes.
to reflect?
That is correct. And in the second recommendation, the audit recommended that we report total response time, which includes call processing, turnout time, as well as the en route or on-scene time.
So if they call 911, goes to the police department at 3 p.m.,
Yes,
and then the police department has a direct line to the fire department,
that is correct.
and hopefully at the 911 at the police department, it's picked up right away and there's no delay. If there is a delay, which sometimes there's calls holding,
Right.
then that call is going to sit in the hold pattern, which is going to delay the connection to the fire department. So an ideal situation, from 3 p.m., the call goes into the PD then switches it over at 3 what? How long does it take to get switched from the PD to the fire?
Normally, as soon as the LAPD answers the phone call at their dispatch center, they'll ask the question, is this a police or fire incident? As soon as they fire or EMS, then it's immediately transferred over.
Okay, so say it's 3:01 by the time they get that information.
Yes.
And is there ever a delay with the fire dispatch accepting those calls? Do they ever have backup like the police department has backup where they're calls holding in the queue, no one to answer? Or are they always someone there answering first ring, second ring?
We answer our 911 calls within 10 seconds, approximately 96% of the time.
Okay, so there's
There
always
are
someone
times,
available.
there are times when we do get busy, as you indicated, during those times where people are either coming to work, going to work, you have high traffic or high call volume times in which some of our call processing does take a little bit longer, but for the most part, we do a very good job.
Okay, so then it goes to LA Fire, and then from there, it gets dispatched to a station.
That is correct.
Okay, and how long does that take from the time the fire folks get that till they dispatch a unit?
From the time that we receive the 911 call to the time it gets dispatched to a fire station is approximately 60 seconds.
Okay, so that's minutes, so 31302, say 302, and then when it gets to the station,
Gets to the station, each station has, if it's an EMS call, they have 60 seconds to respond on an incident.
60 seconds to jump on the rig and take out off the
Exactly.
station. So that's 30, so say we're at 303, and then the response time, so say we've gone 3 minutes from the time the call goes into LAPD to the time they're actually in the rig, leaving the station,
And then 4 minutes to respond.
4 minutes to get to location.
That is correct. If the task force, in their analysis, they went over the data that Cindy had talked about from 2007 to March of 2012. They reviewed the data, cleaned it up, separated the emergency and non-emergency calls, and determined that during that course of time, our average response or overall total time was 6 minutes and 45 seconds.
Okay. And I thought that there was somehow some standard with a 5-minute response time, or that's what we were aiming for?
And referring back to the NFPA standards that we talk about, if you look at NFPA standard 1221 in terms of call processing is 60 seconds.
Okay.
In terms of turnout time, it's 60 seconds, and then response times is 4 minutes, which is a total of 6 minutes.
Okay. So I look at now 6:45, 6 minutes, 45 seconds?
Is our average, overall average for all our calls throughout the city.
Okay. That's medical and fire.
That's, yes, that is correct, all medical and fire.
So we could
combined.
say, safely say, 7, you could expect that time, from the time the call goes in to the time someone arrives, you would say less than 10 minutes.
Oh, definitely.
Okay. So 7 minutes, they're about, and if they hit traffic, then that's going to delay them even farther.
And again,
Even
that's
longer.
why you have that average of 6 minutes and 47 seconds, because there are times of the day when you do hit traffic, and there are other times, as you said, 3 o'clock in the morning versus 3 o'clock in the afternoon. 3 o'clock in the morning, our resources is going to get there much quicker.
And yesterday I was traveling up the 110, some guy was sitting on a sign, and he was going to jump, I guess, and they had the freeway blocked, they had that landing pad that they put out there on the freeway.
Air cushion,
Was it air?
rescue air cushion.
They had a air cushion there, they had the SWAT team, they had Highway Patrol. I mean, this one guy sitting on this ledge, said 8th and 9th Street is to where that sign is, and he's just sitting there. Well, obviously they got to do something, so they blocked off the freeway. So if someone had to get to a location, they had multiple rigs there.
Yes.
Then that would obviously be a delay because everything feeding onto the 110 was jammed, which is something we have to take into consideration. Sometimes it's beyond our ability to control that.
Exactly.
Okay, so now that's the data, that's the measured. So what lessons have we learned from analysis of the department's response time data? So what have we learned from this audit that came through with this information?
One of the good things, and again, the task force identified that we had some challenges with the way we were reporting data. As a result of the controller's audit, we went back and analyzed exactly what we were doing, and in moving forward, we now have a process in place that identifies when we do have those anomalies where you have a high response time or you have a high call processing time, because there may be something within the system that needs to be corrected, or it may be something with actually one of our resources that, again, we can correct.
Okay, and then where can we have improvements, or what areas can be improved given the data that has been revealed by the controller? In what areas will we get the most benefit, deployment, better dispatch, technology, et cetera? So how do we improve it even more than we're at now?
What the fire department is doing currently right now in terms of technology, we're in the process of replacing our fire station alerting system. This is a process in which our resources in the fire stations are notified. An RFP has already been released. We will be having vendor responses coming back in January.
Is this where the lights go off and the
Yeah,
alarm
exactly.
goes off? Okay.
Exactly. Lights go off.
That's been going on since you were a child, probably. Well, I
A
mean,
lot longer than that.
They haven't changed it. It
No,
seems
they
the
have
same
not.
thing.
So that'll be good. That'll be coming out in January. At this same time, we are currently working on putting together an RFP for a new CAD system, which is our computer-aided dispatch system. That is the system that currently right now is over 20 years old and needs to be replaced. Fortunately, we were very fortunate to have approximately $12 million put in our budget to replace our CAD system. So we're going through the RFP process, or putting together an RFP to go out to replace that CAD system. Part of our challenges is that we're limited in staff as well as everybody else. The same people that are working on the fire station alerting system are the same people that need to work on our CAD system, which has caused a little bit of delay, but we are moving forward because the funding has been identified.
When that, and the trucks, the rescue, the engine, when that comes up on the screen, is there directions how to get to that location?
Actually, we're trying to move forward in that too. That is our GPS or our automatic vehicle locator process that we're trying to move forward. And again, we need to identify funding for that. When we finally get that implemented, then that mapping will come up for the individual resources as well as the automatic vehicle locator for our dispatch center. They will know exactly where every resource is so that the closest resource can be dispatched.
Okay.
Sometimes you'll have, right on the border of districts, you may have a resource that's right on the border that may be actually closer than the actual fire station itself. Having that automatic vehicle locator installed in that piece of apparatus, it's going to pick up that closer resource and get us a better response time.
Okay. And then the map, I've seen them get the maps. If they know it's a major intersection, Laurel Canyon, Ventura Boulevard, they can find that.
Yeah.
But if it's some areas up in the hill areas or in Pacific Palisades, Mr. Rosenthal, if they don't have that map and looking at that map and trying to figure it out, Thomas Guide's kind of like gone out the window for the GPS systems and the Garmin's and the little systems you put in the car.
Yeah.
So they don't have that in the vehicles yet.
No, they don't, and in our current process, one of the nice things is that a lot of individuals are drivers, are engineers and apparatus operators. Their task is to know the district, to know the streets. One of the things that they do on a regular basis is study the area so that they know the best way to respond to an incident, even if you use GPS, they may tell you a certain direction, but an individual that is familiar with the district will know some of the shortcuts.
See, on a fire, it's pretty easy to look at the smoke.
Oh, yeah, that's,
Look at the
well, sometimes.
Yeah, medical emergency is a whole lot different.
Yes.
And you're obviously not going to.
That is correct.
So we're working on that technology. What future steps can be taken to improve response times?
Well, I think it's a combination of everything that I just talked about. Our task force will continue to look at ensuring that our response times or information is being reported accurately from our dispatch center. We're always looking for methods to improve our dispatch in terms of call processing. Technology is probably going to be our biggest method of improving our response times, especially with AVL and GPS, as well as having a reliable CAD system and fire station alerting system that doesn't have problems. One of the things that we're looking to try and implement, or part of our RFP for our new fire station alerting system, is a soft tone that as soon as a fire station comes up as a possible responding resource, sometimes you're not sure if it's going to be an EMS call, a structure call, or something else, but what we're looking is part of our RFP was to have a pre-alert installed into each fire station so that as soon as a call comes in that is within a certain district, that station will get alerted that they're going to be getting an alarm. So now individuals that are working on a project, if they're sitting down for meals, they're getting pre-alerted that they're going to be going on a call. And then as soon as the call comes in, then they will determine which resource needs to respond. If you're coming out of a station that has multiple resources, that's going to improve our response times too.
Okay. And the timeline for implementing this new technology into the fire department, and this technology has been in use in other departments around the country? This isn't
Yes.
the new stuff. This has been
No,
around.
is specifically AVL is implemented in other departments. Again, trying to identify funding for it. We're working on identifying funding. We hope to have that implemented at least by next fiscal year. The two other projects, the fire station alerting and the CAD system, are moving through the RFP process.
So we're looking at implementation in the next couple of years
Yes.
for full implementation.
Full implementation. What we looked at, especially with the fire station alerting, we have 106 fire stations, and it's in doing some research with other departments that have recently installed a new fire station alerting. It's about 1 week per fire station to install a new fire station alerting. With 106 fire stations, you're looking at a couple of years.
Yeah, just to put the hardware and get it.
Exactly.
Okay. Do they do it with, like, the police department has bureaus, South, Valley, West, Central. Is the fire station, I know you got 106, but are they broken up into, you would do this area and then you do this area, or is it just a hodgepodge?
I'm not sure. I'm not involved in the RFP.
Or the higher.
I think when they finally get together and determine how they want to do that, most likely they will try and concentrate on one area at a time. From I think a vendor perspective, it's a lot easier to put resources in one location and then start moving it around.
It's a huge city, 427 square miles.
It is.
Up and down, and the fireboat and everything else you have, and the helicopters, and there's a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Tremendous amount. Okay, today's LA Times. Let's hear it for the LA Times.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. They're back there. 9/11 dispatch and reducing the shift from 24 hours to regular 8-hour shifts. Would a reduction in staff at dispatch improve response times? What shifts could see the most reduction? What factors will the department look at in making such a determination? How many firefighters will go back to the field as a result? What are the department's plans to upgrade its dispatch system? The article states that the system is 30 years old, malfunctioned in the past. We know they're going to be updating the system. So what about this issue that they want to have the 8-hour shift versus the current deployment plan that they have for the dispatch?
Currently, right now, we actually went to EERC to get instructions on moving forward with the 40-hour work week. That is, it was determined in EERC that it is a meet and confer process. So because it is meet and confer, I really can't go into details. All I can tell you is that the department is recommending that the dispatch center go to a 40-hour work week.
So that means that a person would come in, work their 8 hours,
That is correct.
and then go home, so they wouldn't have the,
We would no longer be on the 24-hour platoon schedule that is currently implemented at our dispatch center.
would that call more people or fewer, more or fewer?
What we're looking at is trying to maintain the same staffing level that we currently have, just putting them on 8-hour days. What we're trying to do is mirror closely to what LAPD dispatch center looks like from a staffing model.
And what other departments have gone to that staffing in the 8-hour versus the platoon formation?
I don't have a list in front of me, but there are a number of fire departments throughout the country that use an 8-hour staffing model, an 8-hour or a 10-hour staffing
Do any of
model.
them use 12-hour?
I'm sorry?
Do any of them use a 12-hour plan?
There are some that use 12 hours. There's actually very few dispatch centers that use a 24-hour platoon duty schedule.
So then the firefighters, no, they're all firefighters that are assigned to that.
That is correct.
Any of them light duty, or are they all full duty?
No, some of them are restricted duty.
But no permanent positions there that would be, for example,
Well, even if we move to a 40-hour work week, a firefighter could still work that 8-hour schedule or the 40-hour work week. We currently have individuals on 40-hour work weeks in administrative positions.
right. Okay, so it's not new.
No,
So you work, what is your,
I'm, well, probably 12.
you get paid for 8, work 12.
Yes, that's it.
I know this feeling. Mr. Rosendahl.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, for your thoughtful questions on all
Thank you.
this. First, I'd like to ask the Controller's Office a couple of 3 questions. Have you had an opportunity to review the Fire Department Task Force on Information and Data Analysis report? Have you looked at that?
No, we have not seen it yet.
Okay, I urge you to look at it because that is the bottom line of at least the suggested strategies that we go forward. I think it's critical that you take a look at it. Secondly, in the very beginning, you were saying a third, correct, aren't clear and we don't know which is which. Explain that.
That is correct. The database, about 1.9 million records, incidents in there. Once we look at it, there were over 650,000 records that did not have any code either as emergency or non-emergency. They were coded maybe emergency, maybe non-emergency. And because of that reason, we could not make a distinction or compute the response time in accordance with an FPA standard.
Yeah, and your response to that was?
We actually, since the report came out, the task force was able to bifurcate the emergency from the non-emergency, so we would have accurate information in terms of response times and comparing apples to apples and oranges to oranges, so you weren't mixing the two together. Because that would skew our overall response time when you combine the two together.
Do we have a red flag day today? I know they were talking about the region having it and so on.
No, it was not. They actually canceled it. Weather changes all the time.
Yeah, it sure does.
We were not in red flag.
Speaking of weather changing, there's a good possibility of rain on Thursday and all day Friday. Do we make contingency planning for mudslides?
What we will be looking at is, as the days get closer, again, we don't want to depend on the weather too much. As we get closer, then I think the weather prediction becomes more accurate. If that is the case, yes. We always look at we have maps that have been developed over in the areas that we've had previous fires in which indicate where there's possible mudslides.
Yeah. Now, cell phone hell is what a lot of people talk about in the palace. It's hell. And the problem is the system of a GPS and a cell phone. What is the percentage of people in my district right now that only respond to cell phones, and since there are not enough towers up for that, we have potential problems. And how large of a problem is it?
I don't have that information in terms of your specific district. I can tell you, unfortunately, with everybody having cell phones, approximately 60% of our calls are through cell phones.
Yeah, and that being the case, if you can't track it down because there's a spot where there's no tower, it almost becomes a very crisis situation because you're trying to figure out what it is and who's coming and where it's going, and you can't get that message out, correct?
Exactly, and that's why it's so important to identify the location. The first question that our call takers ask when they take a 911 call is, what is the location of your emergency? Even if we lose cell or connection right after that, as long as we have a location, we can dispatch a resource if we get disconnected.
And as we know, part of the issue is, at least in my district up in the Palisades, where there was a fire. The media got there before we got there. And part of our problem was the full engine company was there, but not everybody knew exactly the direction to go because it wasn't the folks who were familiar with every street. What effort are we going to make when we have a red flag to get the experienced people who know their area so we can at least get there in a timely manner?
Well, that's always going to be a challenge, council member. Again, hopefully, as we move forward with technology and we get the GPS, then each apparatus will have that mapping system installed in their apparatus so that even if you have a resource that is out of the district, as soon as that incident is dispatched, it'll come automatically up on that screen.
Yeah, and that is obviously key and importance. We had some issues in Mandeville Canyon where we had hoped to have a full EIR. But then we were told that the money was yanked from us and put somewhere else, which means we're vulnerable in that canyon for at least communicating among you and our own people. What can we do about that?
In terms of improving our communications,
Yeah.
we're always, from the fire department's perspective, we're always looking at methods to improve our communications, whether that requires a request to have an additional cell site or something. Our resources routinely will, especially in Mandeville Canyon, I know I've driven up there a number of times. It's a long distance to get from the sunset all the way to the end of that canyon.
That's right.
Our resources routinely will check for dead spots from a radio communication perspective.
Yeah.
To ensure that we do have a good communication from our resources to our communications or our dispatch center.
You know, ironically, it's about 180 feet the tower would be. And when I was in the cable business, I went up in my hard hat with my folks, and everybody would be waving me down who had issues with reception. And we would have to fix it right then and there. I'd climb up the poles and be with my own folks doing that. But when everybody recognized me, they would come out on the street. And the biggest fear I have, frankly, is that there's no way out except one way. So it's called either stay in your place and shelter yourself, which is probably when you don't have much time. We almost had that issue when we had the fire on Sepulveda, leaping up that would have gone to Mountain Gate first and then could have looped right into Mandeville Canyon. The irony was I was given a full briefing the week before, and I was saying, well, what role can I play in it? And they explained what role I could play. So I was there communicating it and also moderating the whole group with the media there. But the media's role is extremely sensitive and important. So if I could just ask the controller one more question. You figure that we're losing how much money? Does your audit say? Because it's code 3 and it should be 4 or whatever that story is.
don't remember
We
that.
did not identify any cost issues or any.
Speak louder, I can't hear you.
We did not identify any cost issues related to any of.
Just the response time,
Yeah,
not the cost.
just-
Yeah, okay.
There was no financial part of that.
And I might also just do a throwaway on another issue, and I have to thank you, Chief Hara. You are a major player in the Japanese-American community, and we've been fighting to get a historic marker right there at the corner of Lincoln and Venice Boulevard, and the process is moving strongly forward. And I also appreciate the fact that you suggest I go to Manzanar, which I did go with 7 folks who survived that particular situation. And it was very informative for me, especially to see their children in uniform who are fighting, coming over and being with their parents. And it had a compelling impact on me. And I just want to thank you for the leadership you provided with the whole Manzanar issue. As you don't know, there are 10 camps there were, and 110,000 people were incarcerated. And that was when Roosevelt said, anybody that, is of Japanese background should be considered a potential enemy, and these places were set up. So I appreciate your leadership on that issue as well. Thank you.
Call takers and dispatchers.
Yes.
2 different folks, right? The one who takes the call versus the one that's dispatching.
That is correct. Oftentimes, they're referred as the same.
But they're 2 separate roles.
But they are 2 separate roles. Our dispatchers are actually what's called a radio controller. They're the ones that you hear on the radio talking to our resources.
They're communicating with the
resources
folks in the field.
Exactly. They're the ones that are actually talking on the radio, talking to our resources. Currently, our city is divided up into 3 different radio channels. We have a Metro and Harbor EMS channel. We have a Metro Harbor Fire channel, and then the Valley operates on a separate channel itself for both fire and EMS.
So when Mr. T-Fank calls and he's trying to figure out where he's located, that individual would be communicating with him. Meanwhile, the dispatch doesn't do anything until they get the information, the factual information, which could be another delay while they're trying to decipher the information.
Actually, in our current system, the way our process works, when a call taker gets a 911 call, as soon as that call taker identifies what type of call it is, especially when it's a heart attack or difficult breather, they can automatically dispatch a resource from their council. They will continue with questioning, especially if it's an incident such as a cardiac arrest where CPR needs to be started. The call taker can walk the caller through how to perform CPR with that individual while our resources are being dispatched.
By the call taker.
It automatically gets what we call pended, which means that if the resource is in the fire station, it'll automatically dispatch that resource. Now, the radio controller is the one that manages all those resources. If that resource happens to be out of the fire station and on the radio, then that radio controller will then verbally dispatch that resource over the radio.
So are they working in conjunction with each
They
other?
do.
Do they
very
like
important.
do they like partner up?
Yes.
Okay. And then if you're talking about that new modification, would that apply to both the call taker and the dispatch?
When you say new modification, you're
The
talking
modification, they're talking about the 8-hour shift
the 40-hour work week. Yeah, it would operate exactly the same.
on both sides.
Yes.
Okay.
No, nothing would change.
The PD, I think, they have the call takers, the 911 takers, then the routine, and then they've got the ones that are communicating, which is basically the same thing. The
Yeah,
call
basically
taker,
the same thing, yeah. In terms of the functions or their responsibilities, it would remain exactly the same. The only difference would be the work schedule.
okay. And do they have a fallback system like the PD has the Valley Communications Center and they've got the Downtown Center? Do you folks have a fallback, or is that just one?
Unfortunately, well, we do have a backup center, but unlike LAPD, it is if our dispatch center goes down, then we staff our backup center, which is currently what was our old dispatch center down on P4, 4 floors below.
So they may,
We don't have the luxury as LAPD does in terms of actually having 2 dispatch centers. So we would like to move forward with that, but unfortunately in the current economic times, that's unfeasible at this point. But it is something that we are looking at, because that would be the ideal model, would be to have another backup center similar to like LAPD has.
and is downstairs, the P4, is that operating all the time, or is that already on, or do they have to start it up?
What we do is we test it on a routine basis to ensure that if our system does go down, that we can move over and start that one up.
So it's not in a standby mode, it's shut down, then they'll activate it if they need it?
Yes,
Okay,
that is correct.
all right. So, Mr. Rosenwald, you did have a request from the controller, and
Yes.
do you follow up what he
Yes, sir.
asked? Did you take care of that?
And also, Chief Yamahata, I want to be clear that my concern, which I know the controller also says, and let me just take it through the question, where the non-emergency incident types and incidents generated for records purposes included in the analysis of the 1.9 million incidents. I'll read it back again, Chief.
Yeah.
Okay? Where the non-emergent incident types and incidents generated for records purposes included in the analysis of the 1.9 million incidents.
Yes, it was.
Okay. For example, obviously, incident categories such as public assist, dead body, tank ship inspection, lockout investigation, end of quote there. Tire change and VIP standby, where an incident number is created. A unit is assigned, but the response time is generally inconsequential or just not applicable. How does that?
Now, I think we did pare down those incidents down
Right.
to where they were either emergency medical incidents or fire non-EMS. The problem came about in trying to define a true emergency where the time that standard that's being used is much shorter in order to get out to that emergency.
Right.
If that makes sense.
All right, so this is going to come to council, so before it gets there, if you could get Mr. Rosenthal's answer. So we're going to note and file it, and then we'll send it on to council, and hopefully we can get this all up and running and save the people that call on the fire department for safety net, because that's what you folks do. And what I heard from an old fire captain who's still on the job, he said, we are your insurance policy. And when it happens, you make sure you have insurance, whether it's medical or fire or whatever the case may be. And when you think about it, you want to have good insurance in case you need it. You don't want to wait and say, well, I wish I had insurance after the incident took place. So it's something to remember, because people say it's an expensive cost. Well, I've had insurance on my cars, motorcycles, et cetera, and my house. You know, I never made a claim, but I keep paying the premiums. And God forbid you have it, it's peace of mind to know that you have it. So whatever they say, you are a great insurance policy. Thank you. Premier insurance policy.
And Chief Yamahata, do you have anything else you want to add?
No, I think, again, we were grateful from the audit, brought up a number of issues that we realized that we needed to move forward on, and we're making those changes.
And when the issues come up about budget, because there's going to be another budget coming forward, and they say, we want you to cut $100 million from your budget, sometimes you're going to say, you know what, if you're going to cut $100 million, this is what's going to happen.
Right.
And I think what's happened is the fire chief, the police chief, the general managers all want to work within this budget, and the problem is, you know, it's just like, I love to say that the box of Girl Scout cookies, there's only so many cookies in that little you can't feed the whole world with it. And you got to say, you know what, we need to maintain this, or this is what's going to suffer. And I think what happens is, when it comes to the council, the budget and finance that comes to the council, we're making these cutbacks, we always think, well, something else is going to come in, and something's going to intervene. We need to make sure that we stand tall and say, if you do this, this is what the result's going to be. And if we get the parking lots to pay what they need to pay, and everybody else to pay what they need to pay, and the Department of Finance, and he's going to collect more money to make sure we got the fire department and the police department, because obviously the revenue has to come in, right? Because it's an expensive operation, the equipment, the helicopters, the personnel, I mean, everything that you're looking at, it's very expensive. So I want to thank the controller for bringing this together, and the fire department obviously agrees with the recommendations and the observations. So we will send this forward, and if you get that information, Mr. Rosenthal, for the council,
Great.
and so note and file and send it on down to the council. Thank you all very much.
And again, thank you, Chief.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
And let's go to number 2.
Item number 2, Controller and Office of Finance reports relative to the Controller's audit of collection and audit procedures for the parking occupancy tax.
Yes. Mr. T-Fank, don't sit there. Come on, Mr. T-Fank. You are Mr. Parking Lot, you know that.
Put a ticket on me if I don't move, right?
Yeah, I'd love to write you a ticket and go to court and testify and see what happens. That'd be funny. Here I have taken the oath and given you a ticket. Former chief, executive director, police commission. I wouldn't do that to you. I'd give you a warning.
Thank you, sir.
I'm giving you a warning right now. Okay, so let's take this one and another audit. And I know we've been working with the Department of Finance, Office of Finance, and with the Commission and bringing things together. I don't know if you're aware that I went out with Councilmember Englander on a parking lot raid, which was very interesting.
Yes, I'm aware.
You should come with us one of these nights and see. It's like, it's amazing. No compliance, anything. It's just amazing what they do, what we found. And I want to thank Mr. Tiefang for letting us go on that operation with the Commission Investigation Division. A lot of dedicated people there, but we visit a lot of places, and reputable places that you would think are in total compliance, totally out of compliance. I mean, didn't do anything they were supposed to do. So, Controller, take it away.
Cynthia Varela with the Controller's Office. On August 9th, 2012, the Controller's Office issued a report entitled Audit of Collection and Audit Procedures for Parking Occupancy Tax. The objective of this audit was to identify potential business risks and areas for improvement related to ensuring the Office of Finance's procedures for collecting and auditing the city's parking occupancy tax are efficient and effective. The audit focused on identifying Finance's significant functions and processes and evaluating management controls for identifying all parking lots subject to POT and collecting all parking tax revenues due to the city. Due to a scope limitation, we performed no detailed test work, which may have provided the financial impact to the city as a result of the risks identified in our review. We were unable to conduct test work due to the restrictions placed on the Controller's Audit Team to access and to review the taxpayer information maintained by the Office of Finance. Both Finance and City Attorney staff had indicated that disclosure of confidential information to the City Controller as part of an audit of finance is not allowed under Section 21.17 of the Los Angeles Municipal Code. We urge policymakers to rectify this through clarification of the municipal code. As far as our audit results, we identified several areas where Finance's policies and procedures require enhancement to ensure the city receives the correct amount of parking occupancy tax revenues in a timely manner. The key findings included the following. Finance's LA tax computer system may not be a complete record of parking lots subject to collecting POT. We found that there had not been a complete survey conducted of the entire city. Number two, there are few contractor resources assigned to the POT discovery efforts. Finance contracts with an outside agency, the Parking Network, to help with their discovery efforts on unregistered or underreporting parking lots. We found that there were a limited number of staff from the contractor that were assigned to this function. Number three, there is an insufficient identifying information provided for discovery efforts. As you may know, since you've gone out on these parking raids, the parking lots can physically encompass multiple street addresses and have multiple entry and exit ways on different streets. And the parking operator determines which address will be used for its police permit and parking certificate, and could conceivably register the same parking lot with different addresses each year. Because LA Tax contains only a single address for the parking lot, it makes it difficult to confirm whether a particular lot is registered and in compliance with that additional field investigative work. Next, we noticed that Finance lacks a formal established audit plan for parking occupancy tax audits. We'd been given only one work plan for 2010 through 2012, and we were told that the work plan was considered preliminary step in determining the work to be performed by the contractor. However, the work plan was not identified as preliminary, and no other documents that could be considered the final work plan were provided, and we did not have any other sufficient work plans that were provided to us that would ensure that appropriate audit coverage for the discovery program had been identified. Improvements can be made to POT reporting. The current parking occupancy tax reporting form that's used by the Office of Finance does not require the operators to provide sufficient detail as to parking fees for daily parking, monthly parking, validated parking, etc. We noted that other cities across the country did require that specificity in the type of parking fees that are being assessed. And this helps ensure that the amount that's being reported by the operators is accurate. We also did a survey of practices implemented by other governmental agencies related to parking occupancy taxes. In some cases, implementing the practice would require voter approval or changes to the city's municipal code. They include assessing an excise tax on the property used. We found several municipalities outside of the United States that assess a tax based on the number of parking spaces. This approach virtually assures collection of the tax while eliminating the processes needed to ensure parking occupancy tax based on the gross receipts is reported accurately and remitted timely. We noted the City of LA prioritizes POT revenue collection. They use various online tools such as software applications for parking locations, Craigslist advertisements, et cetera, as additional ways to identify unregistered parking lots. We also noted San Francisco holds parking operators personally liable for misappropriation of third-party taxes such as parking occupancy tax. These parking occupancy tax is considered a third-party tax because the taxes are collected in trust on the behalf of the city and were never the property of the lot operator. We made 13 recommendations within the report, and based on finance's action plans that they provided to us for review, as of November 16th, we consider 2 of the recommendations, recommendations 1 and 6, as implemented, and the remaining 11 recommendations are considered in progress.
Okay. If we were to collect all the revenue that's due on the parking lots throughout the city, the ones that are honestly supposed to be paying, airport, et cetera, do we ever estimate how much revenue that would be?
No, we don't. Ed Cabrera, Assistant Director, Office of Finance. I think one matter that needs to be clarified is the fact that there are various amounts that are discussed. However, what needs to be understood is that with some of the operators that do not comply with the monthly remittance reporting and payment of tax, what Office of Finance has to do is go through a process of estimating what their liability is. So the figures that are discussed, for example, 23 million, 25 million in outstanding tax, that could be inflated because obviously when the Office of Finance does an estimate, we estimate on the high end to protect the city's interest. So until the taxpayers come forward to provide the actual information to verify what their true liability is, it's difficult to say. The other component of determining the true measure is that once the Office of Finance does obtain information, a taxpayer has the ability to contest an assessment of tax, and sometimes during that hearing process, the tax liabilities are reduced.
At the hearing?
Yes, based on the appeal process, correct.
Okay, so the police department, what information is required in order for a parking operator to receive an operating permit? So what information do they have to provide to obtain the permit, and how many of them do we estimate are running without permits, just running as they wish to run?
Richard T. Fank, Executive Director, Board of Police Commissioners. To apply for a parking lot permit, or an auto park is the correct definition of what the permit status is, one must have their articles of incorporation as an entity. They must provide a contract or lease agreement for the land that they're going to use. They must provide fingerprints for the members of the corporation. They also must provide to us the copy of insurance for the liability coverage for damage to vehicles at the lot. And that pretty much is the information we require from them. And then from that information, we do a background check. And we have processes in place now that have been in place for about the last 2 years, where before we will issue a permit, we contact the Office of Finance to determine if the applicant for that permit has any outstanding parking occupancy tax liability to the city. We have recently expanded that to include any tax liability to the city. So if an operator applies for a particular new lot, even if they have 25 lots they're currently operating, we will check to make sure the lots that they're currently operating are current in parking occupancy tax and that they have no other tax liability.
Did we always have that cooperation between the department and finance?
I would say we've had it, but I think in the past 2.5 to 3 years, Ed and I have aggressively worked together to resolve a lot of the communication issues just by understanding the magnitude of the issues, this disparate systems. You have LA Tax that did not talk to our permitting system until we created Medallion, which is a portion of our Cry Wolf system, which is our false alarm monitoring system.
Right.
Another piece of that manages all of our permits within the police commission is called Medallion. When we bought Medallion, we purchased as a part of that an interface into LA Tax. So Medallion interfaces with LA Tax and they talk to each other. So that process coming online July of 2009 really facilitated a lot of the communication between our staff in Commission Investigation Division and the staff within the Office of Finance. And again, over the past couple of years, we've decided that we just need to have a better cooperation, not relying just on emails, but on phone calls, people knowing each other. We know all of their field enforcement personnel. They know our personnel. They deal with us on a daily basis, and I think that cooperative effort has led to a far better interaction and enforcement posture and permitting posture for the city. If I could just take a few minutes and give you some numbers, because I think it's important to get a frame of reference. And I'll go back to the audit that was done by the Controller's Office. In the audit, they indicated there were approximately 1,900 parking lots that were identified by the Office of Finance. When the audit was received by myself, I said, well, we're not a part of this audit, but we need to get our arms around what is the real number of permitted auto parks. There have been numbers bantered around from 2,000 to 1,200 and in between. So with that, what we did, we requested from the Office of Finance a run, and this goes back August of 2012. We requested a run of the business locations that they identified as an auto park. We received that, and that was 1,771. On the same date, we ran the auto park permitting system, the Medallion system, for all businesses that had an auto park permit. Those numbers at that time came up to be 1,262. Obviously, we had a difference of 509, and we knew where a number of those differences came from. And that is, if I had a parking lot that I got permitted through the Police Commission, I would go to the Office of Finance and I would receive a business tax registration certificate as a business operator, and I would also get a parking occupancy tax certificate, which is basically an account number where I remit my POT on a monthly basis to. Well, I have my auto park for 2 years. My lease expires, the person that owned the land now wants to redevelop that, and it becomes a market. That parking occupancy tax will still remain in the system. So if you run that tax certificate and the number of tax certificates in LA Tax, you'll get a number, but that is not going to correspond to the actual number of parking lots. So you need to reconcile those. So the way we reconcile those, we had a difference of 509. I put a task force together of our employees and officers in Commission Investigation Division, and we literally checked every one of those parcels in the city of Los Angeles, the 509. Took us about 2 weeks to get it done, did it in a task force concept, and of that, we determined that 300 of those, there was no permit required. They weren't being utilized as a parking lot. They did not meet the standard to have an auto park permit. We also found 75 lots that were permitted, but were not in the database within the Office of Finance for whatever reason, and they were current paying POT, et cetera. So that left a universe of 134. So the 134 became our focus of enforcement. That 134, we have gathered 92 of those in compliance. They now have auto park permits. So we have 42 that we continue to work through to get them to come into compliance, either shut down their business or get themselves into compliance. We have a number of cases that we are putting together for violation of the Los Angeles Municipal Code to seek city attorney prosecution for violations. And those cases take time, but we have several that we're working on. One is significant, and hopefully we'll have a resolution to that case soon. So as of today, the current number is 1,354 permitted auto parks in the city. We've done one other thing in cooperation with Office of Finance, and Ed and I did this last year for the 2012 renewals. We identified this year for the 2013 renewals in late October, we received from Office of Finance a listing of all permit holders, just not parking lot permit holders, but all police permit holders that had an outstanding tax liability from the Office of Finance. We broke those into two categories, all other police permits and those that were auto parks. We did this last year with only auto parks. So this year, the listing we received from the Office of Finance had 39 auto parks that were permitted that had a tax liability to the city. And that number that we were given by the Office of Finance as to what that tax liability was $2,065,000, was the total for the 39. Don't know an individual breakout, but that was the total. As of about 3 weeks ago, in the latest information I received from Ed staff, 16 of the operators became current. Now, whether that was POT or another tax liability, I don't know, but the 16 became current by paying a little over $2,000 in tax. That's what they owed. 6 others were working on getting in compliance, and the remainder of the universe, I assume, is maybe progressed into compliance. So I think to get our arms around really what a number is, looking at the 2012 number, based on the data we received, we have about 3% of the permitted auto parks that are not current in their POT to a little over $2 million. So that kind of, I think, brings us to where we are. Now, as to those that are operating without a permit, we find those out from a variety of ways. One is the Office of Finance folks who are out in the street doing their work. They'll tell our officers, we'll go out and do enforcement action. We also have our officers that go out on their own proactively and do enforcement action. You got to know this industry changes every day. So that number is a fluid number. It's somebody shutting down and somebody's coming in. So what we have done, we asked LAPD, and we received 2 additional police officers loaned into us. So I have 4 officers, along with a reserve component that works with us, to go out and do field inspections to try to get the non-permitted lots into compliance. It's a significant amount of effort to get that done, but we do it. And again, we're working towards building some criminal cases against several operators who have been problematic. So that's our efforts and what we've done, and I think the success that we have been able to have in cooperation with the Office of Finance and getting the people permitted. The numbers are not what we like. We like 100%, but I think having 3% of the universe not in compliance with a value, again, the numbers I'm given, a little over $2 million for the current year, and that's not other operators, that's just the current year.
And the part that I find amazing is they're collecting that tax and keeping it. That's why I think we should go arrest them.
Absolutely. It's embezzlement of city funds. That's the point that we have. Exactly. And the cases we're putting together, I mean, we're watching, we have our officers are out there, we're driving, parking cars in that we have, and we're paying the money, and then that's the kind of case we're putting together. And again, as you know, Councilmember Zine, from your experience in law enforcement, these things take a lot of time. You have to have a lot of good evidence before the city attorney and or the district attorney will prosecute.
But I think arresting some for the charge of embezzlement of public funds, since they're collecting public funds, not paying those public funds as they're required by law, to arrest them for embezzlement of public funds.
Absolutely. And
Set an example to say, you know what, if you're going to take our money and not give it to us, that's public money, you're embezzling public money.
But as you well know also, sir, that we have to have that case and go out and do that on a warrant rather than just going out and doing it and then getting them released and not being with the case filed. So that takes the time to put those cases together and
You and I can do it, Starsky and Hutch.
I could do it. It's not that difficult. This is not that hard.
So many have been doing it for so long, and that's why I want to thank Ed for the cooperation that's been shown between your department and the police department, and with the controller doing these audits, it's bringing this to the surface, because if we duplicate this with all these other departments and collect the money, I keep saying, there's a $7 billion budget, and all the special funds, that we would collect what is righteously due us, not jacking up taxes, but just collect what we rightfully should be receiving, we wouldn't have some of these financial disasters that we keep talking about. The fiscal cliff the federal government's dealing with, $16 trillion deficit. We need to have a balanced budget, and then we don't, then there's furloughs, and there's this, and there's that. Have they done furloughs in the controller's office?
Yes.
They have. So when they're doing furloughs, then you can't get the work done. When they're doing furloughs for your folks going out there inspecting, It's like DMV. When they do furloughs with DMV employees, what is DMV? They collect money for the state of California, so they do furloughs so the people aren't working, so we're not collecting money. I mean, it's backwards. So, no, the cooperation, because this has been a pet peeve for me for a long time, when people are taking money that belongs to the taxpayers to provide services, as we heard the fire department trying to upgrade their system and, Richard, what the police department needs to do. So what, are operators required to post their, this is the issue, that post their permit. We talk about this so we can drive down the street and see that they're actually licensed and they're compliant. Do we have that on the...
We have an ordinance being amended now. We're going to include a few other things in it, but the ordinance will require display of the Los Angeles City Seal. Right now there are requirements to display the rates, et cetera. So in addition to the current requirement to display rates and hours of operation will be the city seal and their permit number.
Excellent. And what information is shared with finance that is secured through the permit process?
They receive everything. They have access to our database.
Now, what was mentioned, this 21.7 of the 21.17 of the LAMC, how do we fix that when they talk about, city attorney indicates that disclosure of confidential information to the city controller as part of the finance is not allowed? I mean, what kind of confidential information are we talking about?
If I may, once again, Ed Cabrera, Office of Finance, I think the procedures that Office of Finance has to work under to ensure that taxpayers cooperate by providing financial information. The audits that we conduct can include anything from just basic accounting records to trade secrets, specific contracts that detail proprietary information. So as with all taxing agencies, taxpayers have to have a degree of confidence that the taxing agency is not going to be sharing that information with anyone who does not have a need to know in terms of enforcement of the tax policies. If taxpayers do not have that confidence that confidential information is not going to remain with the taxing agency, then the taxing agency is going to have challenges in getting basic information, number one, to collect the tax, but also to enforce the tax. And that's codified within Municipal Code Section 2117, which, as the controller staff did state, we did work with the city attorney to see if there was any possible way that we can resolve that issue, but the legal opinion that the city attorney gave us, which has been consistent over the years, is that finance is strictly limited in what can be released outside of the taxing agency and what cannot be. And if it's not public information, generally that information cannot be shared with anyone outside of finance.
Okay, I understand. Not that I agree, but I understand. And so what steps does the department take to implement the recommendations? We talked about the recommendations that have been brought forward by the controller. A couple of them they say have. What about the rest of them?
Well, let me say this. First and foremost, I want to thank the Controller's Office and the staff for their report. The Office of Finance does concur with the 13 recommendations. We do appreciate the opportunity to have that dialogue and to identify steps that the department can take to improve the enforcement and collection of the tax. We also want to thank the chair and this committee for providing the support and the recognition of the importance of collecting this self-reported tax and this cash basis tax. Unfortunately, this is a tax that is unlike the business tax, where this is a cash industry. It's no different than someone walking into a liquor store where the clerk basically puts $5 into the till and keeps the other $5 from that $10 transaction and puts it in his pocket. So this is a different tax and a different method. So we do appreciate the chair's support in passing forward from this committee the Bond Ordinance. We believe that that Bond Ordinance is going to put the city in a very key position ahead of the game. Rather than chasing taxpayers to collect this tax, we'll have that bond up in place. We also appreciate the support with the revenue control equipment, and I understand that ordinance is being revised, but we do appreciate the support of the chair and this committee in moving that ordinance forward once it's ready. As far as the recommendations, many of the items that were identified by the controller, we've already been moving forward. We were analyzing. As an example, one of the recommendations was looking at other cities' best practices. As the chair fully is aware, Office of Finance did come forward with the bond ordinance proposal as well as the revenue control equipment based on our analysis of what's being done up in the city of San Francisco. Many of the other recommendations are under analysis or implementation. For example, we've already met with our contractor regarding their current survey, which should be concluded by the end of December, and this is a citywide survey. And I think just to make one thing clear is that the issue as far as the contractor, their focus, based on discussions with Office of Finance, was to try to go out and identify those high-profile areas within the city, for example, near certain sports venues, near entertainment venues, and target those areas first so that we can identify revenue that's not coming into the city that should be. But bottom line is we do concur with the Controller's report. We are moving forward all of the recommendations. We actually recently met with the Controller staff on one of their proposals, as well as with City Attorney and Mr. Tfank. And I will say this, our cooperation with CID and the collaborative effort in developing a strike force is something that has been occurring over the last 3 to 4 years, but our efforts date back to 2004 and even through 2008 when we did propose the ability to refer delinquent POT accounts to CID for revocation has demonstrated that. And of course, as we learn and as we identify best practices and other proposals, our efforts are only strengthened in working with Mr. Tfank and his staff as well as with City Attorney. So we will move these forward and we look forward to continuing our strike force efforts with the relevant regulatory department as well as with City Attorney.
Okay, and I think that once we get the parking lots under control, then we can start taking the people who are selling goods downtown off the street corners for large sums of money, the alley operations where they're cash sales, not paying tax. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of sales taking place, and not that you can be everywhere, but just like the people who disobey the handicap placards, we did a sting on that with the Department of Motor Vehicles and the LA Times and LAPD and DOT, and all these people who are parking in the metered zones, because if you have the handicap, the disabled placard, you can park for free. So people who are working, who don't want to pay to park the car, they'll park in the parking all day long, not pay a dime, and then they get in their car and they drive away. So it's kind of like, I get that disabled placard, I don't have to pay for parking in the parking zone. And that's, again, money that comes into the city for the revenue. So we cited them and took the decals at a very expensive fine. But the problem is there's so many people who are trying to find loopholes instead of paying what they righteously pay, and have the controller say, we did an audit and everything was great and everybody's paying their taxes and it's a utopia. It's sadly not that way. Mr. Rosendahl.
First of all, Richard Teva, God bless you for all of the analysis you did and the facts of what you came down to. That shows real cooperation and coordination. It's the best thing I've heard in terms of clarity on this issue, so I applaud you. Just one simple question. Is there a specific reason why the LA Municipal Code Section 21.17 exists to prohibit the disclosure of confidential information to the city controller as part of an Office of Finance audit? Are there any compelling reasons for this municipal code section to remain in place?
Well, I will answer that, and again, I will just refer back to my earlier comments that, again, taxpayers need to have the confidence that confidential business data is not used for purposes other than for tax administration. I would defer to City Attorney and their legal opinion, but I would just restate that City Attorney has opined on multiple occasions that Office of Finance cannot release that information because that would compromise our tax collecting and enforcement abilities.
He's answered that.
Can I add a comment?
That's the way it goes, unfortunately.
That's all right.
That's the way it is, yeah.
Appreciate it.
The same municipal code would allow controller access to taxpayer information
Right.
if they go directly to taxpayer. It
Okay.
does not allow us to go and get the same taxpayer information if Office of Finance is in custody of the record. That is why we are asking for clarification.
Yep.
I believe it's taxpayers' intention to have controller's ability to audit all city resources, including taxes collected by Office of Finance.
Great.
Well, the fact we're all at the table working together, to me, is what the federal government needs to do so we can
Right on.
avoid this fiscal cliff. And it's all for the people who live and work and pay taxes here that working in a cooperative fashion with all the departments working together. I mean, the big guns go in, the LAPD goes in to do the enforcement, to make the arrest, and then you go in to try and get the information. The controller says, we're doing this, we're doing that. But it's all a cooperative effort, and if everyone does their fair share, then we'll have the resources to service the city. The implementation schedule for the newly adopted bonding requirement approved this year, the implementation schedule, are we close to that?
Yes, we are. We've actually been meeting with city attorney as well as within the last week and a half. My staff did meet with the parking association, so we are working with the association in a cooperative manner. We've also met with CAO as well as a surety company in ensuring that we have appropriate language for the bonding requirement. So we are moving that forward, and we do have every intent to put it up and running as soon as possible, but it will be in effect in 2013.
See, then you're going to look like the hero, because all of a sudden, things are now falling into place. And say, who did that? Ed did that. Who do you think did that? T-Fank helped, but Ed did it. Okay, so let's note and file it. Number 2, create a parking occupancy task force led by finance with assistance of LAPD, city attorney, CAO. Look to improve the parking tax process in order to ensure the city receives all the DOT revenue. This task force should look at best practices, including implementation of controllers' audit recommendations, and report on the status of the bonding requirement and its effectiveness in 180 days. Then instruct LAPD to require all auto park operators to post the police permit number on the parking lot sign. So instead of the city seal, we want them to post the police permit number that they have. So now we've got some legitimacy. If we can do some roll call training with our officers, especially our SLO officers, community relations officers, because I know when I go down the street now and I see the parking lots, I have a whole different view. It's like when I worked Vice, I'd drive by a liquor store, I'd see a little kid at the counter, I'd stop and take a second look, see if this kid's going to buy some beer. Or I'd see a man like Mr. T-Fank up there buying the beer and giving it to the kid. You both get popped. So, I mean, you learn these things as you go along. No, you do. You get him for selling or for giving to a minor. Not that you would do any such activity, but when you work Vice, that's the kind of stuff you do. You go after the ABC violations, and then when you're looking at this, it just broadens your horizon in the knowledge and experience. And Steve Morris in the back, senior lead officer, we'll get him out on the field one of these days to go out there and do police work. He's a senior lead, he knows how to get it done. Because once we learn this and the people understand, like the bandit taxi cabs, when you see a taxi cab, it doesn't have that city seal on the side, you know that's a bandit taxi cab. I mean, it's real easy. You see him pick up a fare in the city of LA, DOT goes after him. So the more knowledge by the officers who do the enforcement will get people into compliance. You go to New York, you go to Washington, D.C., you don't see bandit taxi cabs. I mean, they just don't exist. Here they just kind of pop around and they exist in the parking lots that have been ripping us for years. But it really cracks me up when I see the city attorney come in and they will say, well, they owe $10 million, but we're going to settle for $2 million. I said, what about the other $8 million? Well, we're going to waive that. You know, waive nothing, collect it all. That way we can fund what we need to fund for the fine services we provide. And with that, anything else, Adrian? Mr. Rosendahl?
No, great.
Anything else from you, gentlemen?
No, sir.
Controller? Keep up the good work. Thank you all. Mr. Clerk?
Yep, we're done.
Okay, thank you all very much. Thank you. We are done for today here.